Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. I'm so excited about today's video because I'm going to be chatting about some amazing books to get you to fall back in love with reading. That's right, I've collected a variety of books from a bunch of different genres that I think are all great entry points to re-excite that love for reading that you may have lost, or if you're looking to get into reading itself, I think all of these books would make great starting points. Without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Actually, quick note, there are so many birds outside right now. It's springtime, so if you hear some bird song, hopefully you find it scenic and relaxing. But nevertheless, I apologize in advance. The first two books I have to recommend are both contemporary literary fiction leading stories. They both are also not too long, so quick reads, and house a bunch of really compelling character point of views. They also kind of do that thing where there's this sort of crisscross of storylines and this sort of intersecting of fate, a plot device I personally love so much. The first book I have to recommend is The Smell of Other People's Houses by Bonnie Sue Hitchcock. This book is honestly incredible. I sobbed reading this book and it's under 300 pages long. I read it in basically a 24-hour period. Absolutely no pressure there, but I'm just trying to illustrate that it's one that will really propel you through it, and it's just full of so many characters you will cry and root for, and it's also a really interesting setting. So this story takes place in Alaska during the 1960s, and you follow a slew of different perspectives from a variety of young people kind of on the precipice of various very large and significant decisions or just moments in their life. The setting of this book is also incredibly significant, not only from a cultural standpoint and just an activity standpoint and just a day-to-day impact of the weather and the reality of living in Alaska has on these characters' lives, but also there is a political element with Alaska having just recently gained statehood and the impact of that having a very personal impact on these characters' lives, but also as a larger social and political reality. This is a story, as I mentioned, that I sobbed reading it. I don't know how the author was able to create so many emotional storylines where you felt so connected to these characters' lives. It's a true slice of life kind of book. You're sort of dropped in and pulled out. You will just have all of these characters living in your heart. It's a bittersweet tale, kind of leaning more on the sweet side. Again, I feel like a great book to check out, especially if you're looking to just read a book that you will really love. Not only is this a book I love and gave 5 stars to, but I also feel like it's a great place to kind of get back into reading as well. Next up, I also have A Visit from the Goon Squad by Jennifer Egan. This is a winner of many awards. This is a national bestseller and just overall beloved story. So you don't just have to take my word for it that this is a good book. This is another story following so many different characters. But what this book does particularly, which I think is really, really impactful, is that you're kind of jumping forward and back in time, and the threads of connection are very, very tenuous. This book also very much centers the music scene, particularly the punk scene of the 80s, and then fast forward, you follow one of those characters as they're now a record exec. This story is all about characters and life and living. There are characters you will love, there are characters you will hate, and what's really interesting, what the author does is you run into all of the characters first through someone else's point of view and their opinions of them, and then you get to read about the opinions of themselves and kind of get more insight on who they are and how they view themselves. This sort of shifting of identity is a really, really fascinating approach. Music, again, is also really central in this book, which I think is a lot of fun and a great kind of thematic element kind of pulled throughout the entire story. If you love Daisy Jones and the Six, if you're really into the show or just like things with lots of characters, this is a great book to pick up. Next up, I have 2 science fiction / fantasy recommendations if you're wanting to kind of get back into that genre but not really sure kind of what to start with. The first book I have to recommend is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is the first book to a fantasy trilogy, a historical fantasy trilogy, which is actually why I feel like it's a fantastic starting place for the fantasy genre. This book is set in a historical snowy landscape, and in a lot of ways it's very literary fiction, historical fiction leaning. It's very character focused with stunning writing and atmosphere, but it also has a dash of magic. You also follow a main character as she grows up throughout the entire trilogy and kind of confronts not only her own power, learns magic, and also works to not only save herself, her family, but the entire world. So obviously there is some very clear fantasy tropes, but the historical setting and time period of this book taking place in 15th century Russia is also really important to the book as well. But in this story, we follow our main character Vasya, and she lives in the wilderness of Russia with her family and like their sort of family compound. At the beginning of this book, her father remarries a new woman who is very, very devout. And once she arrives in this compound, she decides she's going to rid of any type of pagan ritual or pagan religion. But in doing this, she basically provides an opening for some evil forces to kind of break in and threaten everyone's lives. Vasya decides to take it upon herself to try to save everyone. Religion, history, social norms, and expectations all play a huge part in this book, and obviously also using fantastical elements as a large part of this plot line as well. A great trilogy. I feel like if you love fantasy or not, you will really, really enjoy this series. Next up, I have the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey, another like TV show to book pipeline, I'm hoping here. This is by no means a short series. There are a lot of books, but I feel like it's such a great one to pick up because in my opinion, it's pretty straightforward. It's a very plot-focused series. It's one that's going to capture your attention and keep it book over book. It's so unbelievably explosive and full of so many twists and turns, you will just simply not be able to put it down. And that's why I feel like it's such a great place to start with sci-fi. It's very non-complicated sci-fi. There's nothing too bananas going on in terms of the technology and the worlds that we're visiting, so I feel like it's very, very approachable. Also, there are a lot of characters you get to read from, like, root for, and for that, I also feel like it's constantly staying fresh. If you're not familiar, the Expanse series is set in kind of a near future reality where Earth has expanded beyond its borders. And now there are governments that exist on Mars, the moon, and also in a series of space stations called the Belt. These governments all hate each other. At the beginning of book one, there's essentially an event that causes a spark, creating a huge rise in tension between all of these groups of people, centering one of our main characters, James Holden. We follow their crew as there's lots of macro and micro problems to solve. These again are just so easy and fun to read, totally explosive, great audiobooks as well. So if you're looking for like a commute series to keep you entertained, this is a great one to pick up. And as I mentioned, there is a really fantastic adaptation as well. So if you want to read and watch along, this could also be really fun for that too. Next up, I have a recommendation if you're looking for like a really great beach read, something soft, fun, cute, and romantic, something that's going to warm your heart. And for that, I have The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Song of Achilles. This book is just delightful from page one. It has elements of fantasy, but it's definitely kind of like a rom-com found family at the heart of it. In it, we follow our main character, Mika Moon, and Mika Moon is a witch. She lives in London, and she spent her entire life kind of living in isolation, as witches aren't supposed to congregate with one another, as it might tip off humans of their existence, but also it's hard for Mika Moon to make real lasting connections because she has to hide so much of herself. She does, though, have a YouTube channel where she pretends to be a witch online, which she assumes is harmless, until one day she receives an email with a proposition to basically become a magic teacher to 3 young witches in a faraway place called Nowhere House. She's skeptical, she's unsure, but she decides to visit anyway. There she meets 3 incredibly charming young girls, a very grumpy librarian who despises her upon meeting, and a bunch of other characters that are just delightful to see. And from there you watch Mika Moon as she becomes integrated in this newfound family, a romance begins to bloom, and there's just so many charming elements to this book. I had a smile on my face the entire time while reading it. It's definitely low stakes. It's definitely one that'll make you feel all warm and cozy on the inside. So if you want something that's just like charming and fun, and again, a really quick like beach or airplane read, I would definitely recommend reading this. Another great option I feel like is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying a Vampire by Grady Hendrix. I feel like horror and like campy horror is very popular. So if you love to watch those types of movies or shows, you've got to read this book. And I also really want to emphasize that this book has a fantastic audiobook. The narrator of it is incredible. The different voices that she uses for the different characters really brings this book to life. So if you don't read a lot, I feel like that could be a really engaging way to approach this story, but this book is just wild. It's set in like a very white, very 90s suburban neighborhood, and we basically open up following a group of women who all have a book club, and they're obsessed with true crime. And one day, a very strange and mysterious and very handsome man moves into their community and all seems well, but children begin to disappear disappear around town, and one of our main characters begins to suspect that he might be a vampire. And a lot of other stuff happens throughout this book, but they basically decide to take it upon themselves to deal with this problem. But this book is like not straightforward. It has a lot of commentary of the time, of the place. Like, again, this vampire is able to exist within this world because he takes advantage of white suburban culture and also the blind eye that these communities tend to have towards other communities that exist in their town. That being said, though, this book is horrifying. The vampire is creepy. The society is horrifying in and itself. Like, remove the vampire. I'm terrified of this neighborhood, just to be honest. The narration is incredibly compelling. You will be flying through this. I guarantee it. It's so disturbing. Will keep you on the edge of your seat. Just like really clever and addictive as well. I also feel like a great book to kind of get you back into reading, especially if you love something that's a little more intense and horror leaning. And then the last book I have to recommend is one that many people recommend, but again, I feel like it's a great starting point because many people will be familiar with the inspiration material, if that makes sense. And that is the Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I really feel like this is a wonderful book to pick up because I think it really shows how fiction can take something we all know, and that is like the tale of Achilles, and really transform it, reimagine it, add so much atmosphere and love, and just shows how compelling fiction can basically be. You know what I mean? We all know about the Odyssey. We all know about Achilles' heel. To be able to humanize these huge figures of history and culture like Achilles and Patroclus and provide one of the most romantic and sweeping tales, which is their love story. I love it. And I also just feel like it shows how fun like reimaginings can be within modern fiction, which we just love to see. But if you're not familiar, again, this is the story of Achilles and Patroclus, and it basically is told from Patroclus's point of view and shows him growing up, entering Achilles' household as the two boys meet, become best friends, fall in love, and then obviously their involvement within the Trojan War, which we all kind of know how that shakes out. It plays wonderfully on dramatic irony and kind of the knowledge of what we all know is coming. So it has this sort of heartbreaking tragedy element to it, but it is so well done and beloved for many reasons. This book is so popular and for good reason, which is why I wanted to include it in this video. I saw Bill reading this book. It's definitely a great one to check out. Alrighty guys, those are some books that I love that I also feel like will make you fall back in love with reading. Please let me know down below some books you think are like great starting places, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!